Jerusalem smelled like dust and blood and burning incense all at once. It was Passover season, the city swollen with pilgrims from every corner of the known world, the streets choked with the press of bodies, the bleating of lambs being led toward the temple, the distant ring of coins changing hands at market stalls. The stones of Jerusalem were ancient and golden in the morning light, worn smooth by 1,000 years of sandaled feet. Rome's banners hung above the city gates, purple and indifferent, a reminder of who held power here, or so everyone believed. In the middle of all of it, a man walked. His name was Jesus of Nazareth, a carpenter's son from a small town in Galilee, a teacher who had spent 3 years walking dusty roads, touching the untouchable, eating with the unwanted, and saying things that split the air like lightning. He had wept at a friend's grave. He had laughed at wedding tables. He had held children in his arms and called them treasures. He was, by every human measure, achingly real, a man who got tired, who got hungry, who knew what it was to love people and watch them walk away. And now, on a Friday morning in the spring of the world, the question that had been gathering like a storm over everything hung in the air above Jerusalem. Was this the end? He had carried the crossbeam through the narrow streets of the city, a rough-hewn timber that tore at his shoulders, already laid open by the Roman flogging that had come before. The soldiers had been thorough. The scourge left a man barely recognizable. By the time Jesus stumbled through the city gate, the crowds lining the road were a blur of faces, some weeping, some jeering, some simply frozen in stunned silence. They pressed a crown of thorns onto his head. Not a delicate thing, thorns long as a finger, braided and driven down. It was meant to mock. King of the Jews, the soldiers said it the way men say things when they want to break someone with words alone. He fell under the weight of the cross somewhere along the Via Dolorosa, the way of suffering. A man named Simon, a traveler from Cyrene who had come to Jerusalem for the festival and found himself suddenly yanked from the crowd, was made to carry the beam the rest of the way. Imagine the weight of it in Simon's hands. Imagine what it meant, though he could not have known it yet. The place they brought him was called Golgotha. In Aramaic, it means the place of the skull, a low hill just outside the city wall where Rome carried out its executions in plain view. A public warning to anyone watching what happens to men who challenge empire. It was 9 in the morning when they nailed him to the wood. The sound of iron striking iron. 3 times, then silence, then the groan of the cross being lifted upright and dropped into the earth, is something no one present ever forgot for the rest of their lives. Above his head, Pilate had ordered a sign fixed in 3 languages, Hebrew, Latin, Greek, so no one could miss it. Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. 2 other men were crucified beside him that day. Criminals, the scriptures say simply. One hurled insults, but the other turned his head, voice barely a breath, and said, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And Jesus, in agony, answered him, today you will be with me in paradise. At the foot of the cross stood a small group who had not run. His mother, Mary Magdalene, the young disciple John. They could not save him. They could only stay. And sometimes staying is the only kind of love left. From the 6th hour, noon, a darkness fell over the whole land. Not a cloud passing the sun. Not a storm rolling in from the sea. A darkness that had no natural explanation and that the people standing there felt in their bones like a cold hand. It lasted 3 hours. And then, in that darkness, Jesus cried out in a voice loud enough to carry the ancient words of the 22nd Psalm. Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani? Which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? Those words have lived in human hearts ever since. Not because they are a moment of failure, but because they are a moment of shattering honesty. The cry of a soul in the uttermost darkness. The prayer of a man who did not pretend the suffering wasn't real. At 3 in the afternoon, Jesus spoke again. It is finished. 3 words in the Greek, tetelestai. A single word, actually, stamped on paid receipts in the Roman world. Paid in full. He said it not as a man collapsing in defeat, but as a man completing something he had come to complete. And then, with what breath remained in him, he said, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. And he died. What happened next, Matthew's Gospel records without hesitation. The curtain of the temple, a massive, woven veil 60 feet high and 4 inches thick, the barrier between the outer courts and the Holy of Holies, the innermost room where only the high priest could enter once a year, tore in two, from top to bottom, as if pulled apart by invisible hands. The earth shook, rocks split, tombs broke open, and the Roman centurion standing at the foot of the cross, a soldier who had supervised crucifixions before, who knew what a criminal's death looked like, who had no reason to say what he said, looked up at the man on the cross and said, truly, this was the Son of God. He was the first Gentile to confess it. A soldier, a man of Rome, and he said it before the resurrection, before the empty tomb, before any of the proof anyone would ask for. He said it standing in the earthquake and the darkness and the torn open afternoon, looking at a dead man on a cross. Joseph of Arimathea, a wealthy member of the Jewish council who had believed in Jesus in secret, went to Pilate and asked for the body. It was an act of courage to associate yourself with a man Rome had just executed for treason. He wrapped the body in clean linen and laid it in his own new tomb, cut from the rock of a garden nearby. A stone was rolled across the entrance. The women who had stood at the cross followed, and sat across from the tomb, and watched, and waited. It is tempting to rush past Friday to get to Sunday, but the story asks us to pause here, in the dark, at the sealed stone, in the grief of the people who loved him and had no way of knowing yet what Sunday held. Because this is where most of us live, most of the time. In the middle of stories we cannot see the end of. In rooms where someone we love is gone, and the stone looks permanent, and the silence is complete. The disciples scattered. Peter wept bitterly in the dark somewhere. Mary sat by a tomb. What the crucifixion reveals is not that God is absent in suffering, but that God entered it. Fully, completely, without flinching. That the Son of God did not watch human anguish from a safe distance, but walked into the very heart of it, and carried it, and cried out in it. The cross was not the end of the story, but it was the price of the story, and that price was paid by someone who had the power to walk away, and chose, with open eyes, to stay. This is the mystery that has undone empires and mended broken people for 2,000 years. That love, at its deepest, looks like this.